The whispers followed her like a chill wind, each one a phantom touch of a life she once knew. They said she was nothing without him, a discarded, plain little thing who couldn't keep a man. Tonight, at the city's most glittering charity ball, her ex-husband made sure everyone heard those whispers. Standing over her, his voice dripping with venom and victory, he painted her as a failure for all to see. He laughed, his new wealthy wife clinging to his arm. But in the world of the elite, power is silent, and it arrives not in a shout, but in the whisper-quiet engine of a Rolls-Royce Phantom. And it was about to pull up to the curb. The air in the grand ballroom of the Astor Grand Hotel was thick with the scent of money and stargazer lilies. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of curated perfection. Women in jewel-toned silk gowns floated through the room, their laughter like the clinking of champagne flutes. Men in bespoke tuxedos stood in tight clusters, their conversations a low hum of stock prices and political maneuvers. This was the annual St. Jude's Children's Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of New York's philanthropic social calendar, a place where generosity was a competitive sport and status was the ultimate prize. Amelia Vance felt profoundly out of place. She smoothed down the front of her dress for the 10th time. It was a simple, elegant column of midnight blue satin that she'd bought from a consignment shop on the Upper East Side. It had been a lucky find, a forgotten piece by a designer whose name she vaguely recognized, and it fit her as if it were made for her. Still next to the glittering Chanel and Dior creations that surrounded her, she felt like a sparrow in a flock of peacocks. Her ticket to this exclusive event had come from her one indulgence in her new post-divorce life, her work. As a junior landscape architect at Viridian Designs, she had been part of the team that redesigned the hospital's rooftop Serenity Garden. The firm had been given a table at the gala, and when her boss, a kind elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, had fallen ill with the flu, he had insisted she go in his place. "You did most of the work, Amelia," he'd said, his voice raspy over the phone. "Go. Mingle. Maybe you'll land us a billionaire's rooftop." She had smiled at his joke, but the thought of mingling terrified her. These were not her people. They had never been her people, even when she was married to Mark Thorne. Mark. Just thinking his name left a bitter taste in her mouth. For 5 years she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of a man whose ambition was a raging inferno. He was a vice president at Sterling Financial, a mid-tier investment firm, but he had always aspired to more. He craved the life that filled this ballroom, the easy confidence, the inherited wealth, the effortless power. He had seen Amelia as a stepping stone, then a comfortable accessory, and finally an anchor weighing him down. Their divorce had been finalized a year ago. It was brutally simple. He had come home one evening to their modest apartment, his face a mask of cold resolve, and announced he was in love with someone else. That someone else was Tiffany Sterling, the daughter of his boss, CEO Richard Sterling. It wasn't just an affair. It was a corporate merger of his personal and professional lives. He didn't just leave Amelia. He upgraded. He had told her she was too simple, too content with small things. He wanted a woman who could play the game, who understood the currency of connections and designer labels. The last thing he'd said to her before walking out the door for good was, "You'll never understand what it takes to be in a room like this, Amelia. You're just not built for it." And now here she was in a room exactly like the one he'd described, feeling every inch the imposter he'd claimed she was. She took a sip of champagne from a passing tray, the bubbles fizzing nervously on her tongue. She kept to the edges of the room near a large potted palm, trying to make herself as small as possible. She watched the couples on the dance floor, a kaleidoscope of grace and wealth. A part of her, a part she hated, still scanned the crowd for his face. She knew he would be here. Sterling Financial was a major sponsor of the event. He wouldn't miss a chance to be seen, to network, to perform the role of the devoted husband to the Sterling heiress. A sudden commotion near the bar drew her attention. A young waiter, looking flustered and barely out of his teens, had dropped a tray of canapés. A puddle of spilled aioli and shattered porcelain spread across the polished marble floor. A portly man in a too-tight tuxedo was berating the boy, his face turning a blotchy red. "Incompetent fool, this suit is Armani." "Do you have any idea how much it costs?" the man bellowed, attracting more stares. The boy was pale with fear, stammering apologies. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get someone to clean it up immediately." Amelia's heart went out to him. Without a second thought, she put her champagne flute down on a nearby ledge and moved toward the mess. The other guests parted for her, their expressions a mixture of disgust and morbid curiosity. "It's all right," she said softly, her voice a calm island in the storm of the man's anger. She knelt carefully, picking up the larger pieces of the broken plate. "It was just an accident." The portly man scoffed. "An accident? The staff here is supposed to be professional." Amelia ignored him, offering the trembling waiter a small, reassuring smile. "Don't worry about it. Let me just get these bigger pieces so no one steps on them." "Thank you, ma'am," the boy whispered, his eyes wide with gratitude. He hurried off to find a dustpan and a manager. Amelia continued to gather the shards, her midnight blue dress pooling around her on the floor. She was so focused on her task, on diffusing the ugly little scene, that she didn't notice the circle of onlookers. She didn't see the whispers and pointed fingers. And she didn't see the couple that had just stopped a few feet away, their eyes fixed on her kneeling form. She didn't see her ex-husband, Mark Thorne. But he had most certainly seen her. And on his face a cruel, triumphant smile was beginning to form. Mark Thorne adjusted the cuffs of his Tom Ford tuxedo, a smug satisfaction settling over him like a warm blanket. Life was good. A year ago he had shed 130 pounds of dead weight, his quiet, unassuming wife Amelia, and his life had skyrocketed. He had a corner office, a German sports car, and Tiffany Sterling on his arm. Tiffany, with her platinum blonde hair, her surgically perfected nose, and a trust fund that could solve the national debt of a small country, was everything Amelia was not. She was his ticket, and tonight he was cashing it in. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice just loud enough to carry. "Look what we have here." Tiffany, draped in a backless, sequined gown that screamed "new money," followed his gaze. She wrinkled her nose in disdain. "Oh my God, is that her, Amelia?" Amelia looked up, the last piece of broken ceramic in her hand. Her blood ran cold. There he was. Mark looked sleeker than she remembered, more polished. His hair was perfectly styled, and a Patek Philippe watch gleamed on his wrist, a watch she knew he couldn't have afforded a year ago. He looked like he had been born into this world, not like he had ruthlessly clawed his way into it. "Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She started to stand, feeling a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. "Don't get up on my account," Mark sneered, taking a deliberate step closer. The small crowd that had been watching the scene with the waiter now refocused their attention. They could smell blood in the water. "I see you've found a new line of work. Cleaning up messes. It suits you, really. You were always so good at tidying up." The jab was low and personal. He had always called her his tidy-upper, the one who smoothed things over, who managed the mundane details of life so he could focus on his grand ambitions. It had once sounded like a term of endearment. Now it was a weapon. Amelia's cheeks burned. "I was just helping," she said, her voice tight. Tiffany let out a high-pitched, theatrical laugh. "Helping, darling, you look like the help. That dress, did you get it at a thrift store?" A few people nearby tittered. Amelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. Now, Tiffany, be nice," Mark said, though his eyes gleamed with malice. He turned his attention back to Amelia, his voice taking on a tone of mock pity. "I have to admit, Amelia, I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this was your kind of scene. Who did you come with? Did you sneak in with the catering staff?" He gestured around the opulent ballroom. "This is the big leagues. We're surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the city. Richard Branson is rumored to be here tonight. The Vanderbilts have a table. And you're on your hands and knees picking up trash." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart designed to inflict maximum humiliation. He wasn't just insulting her, he was performing. He was showcasing his superiority for his new wife and their audience of elites, using Amelia as the prop to demonstrate how far he had come. "Mark, stop it," Amelia pleaded, her voice trembling. She refused to give him the satisfaction of her tears, but they were threatening to spill over. "Stop what?" Stating the obvious. He took another step, looming over her. "I did you a favor, you know. Leaving you. You were holding me back. You don't have the drive, the killer instinct. You're content with this." He gestured vaguely at her at the broken plate at the floor. "You were always destined for a small, quiet life. I was destined for more." He turned to the small, captivated audience. "This is my ex-wife," he announced as if presenting a bizarre circus attraction. "I tried to tell her about this world to bring her into it. But some people, they just can't be polished. They belong in the background." The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, judging her, pitying her, laughing at her. This was a nightmare. Mark's final words to her, "You're just not built for it," echoed in her ears, amplified by his public declaration. He was proving his point, using her as his evidence. Tiffany clung to his arm, looking immensely pleased with herself. "He's with me now," she said to Amelia, her voice sharp and territorial. "A woman who understands him. A woman who belongs at his side, not on the floor." Amelia finally found her voice, a flicker of her old fire cutting through the shame. "The only thing I see on the floor, Mark," she said, her gaze steady despite the tears welling in her eyes, "is your character." A few people gasped. The insult quiet as it was landed with precision. Mark's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He was not used to her fighting back, but he recovered quickly. "Cute," he spat. "Still got that little bit of fire, huh? Don't worry, the world will snuff it out soon enough. Now if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have actual important people to talk to. Try not to spill anything on your way out." With a final dismissive glance, he turned his back on her, looping his arm through Tiffany's. He started to lead her away, the victor of a battle Amelia hadn't even known she was fighting. The crowd began to disperse, the show seemingly over. Amelia stood alone in the center of the room, feeling exposed and utterly broken. He had done it. He had stripped away her dignity in front of everyone, confirming her deepest fear that he was right, that she was nothing. But the show wasn't over. Just as Mark took his third step away, a hush fell over the grand entrance of the ballroom. The low hum of conversation died instantly. Heads turned not with casual curiosity, but with a sudden sharp intake of collective breath. A presence had entered the room. Through the ornate double doors, flanked by two stone-faced security guards, a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored Brioni suit the color of charcoal. He moved with an unnerving stillness, a predator's economy of motion that made every other man in the room seem clumsy and loud. His face was all sharp angles and severe intelligence, with eyes so dark and piercing they seemed to absorb the light. It was Damian Knight, the reclusive, enigmatic billionaire, the man who owned half the city but was rarely seen. He was a legend, a ghost in the machine of high finance and tech. He never attended these events. Ever. His arrival sent a shockwave through the gala. Mark and Tiffany froze mid-step, their jaws slack. Everyone stared. Damian Knight's gaze swept the room, once cold and dismissive, before it landed. It cut through the crowd, past the gawking socialites and the powerful CEOs. It settled on the one person who wasn't looking at him. It settled on Amelia. And with a purpose that silenced every remaining whisper, he started walking directly toward her. Time seemed to slow down. Each step Damian Knight took on the marble floor echoed in the cavernous silence of the ballroom. He was the undisputed center of gravity, and everyone else was just an object caught in his orbit. The city's most powerful people, bankers, politicians, Old money matriarchs stared, their carefully constructed poise shattered. They looked like peasants witnessing the arrival of a king. Mark Thorne was paralyzed. His mind, usually sharp and opportunistic, was a frantic mess of confusion and awe. Damian Knight is here. Why is he here? He never comes to these things. He's walking this way. The thoughts tumbled over one another. This was the man Mark had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months. Damian Knight's new Elysian project, a multi-billion-dollar sustainable urban development, was the talk of the financial world. Landing even a small piece of that project for Sterling Financial would make Mark's career. He'd sent dozens of emails, tried to pull every string he had, all to no avail. Knight was famously inaccessible, and he was walking right toward them. A surge of adrenaline shot through Mark. This was it. This was his chance. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He quickly composed himself, smoothing his jacket. He would introduce himself, make an impression. Knight was probably heading for Richard Sterling, Tiffany's father, who was holding court near the stage. Mark would intercept him, make the introduction himself. It would be perfect. Mr. Knight. Mark began, stepping forward with his most charming, sycophantic smile. He extended a hand. Mark Thorne, Vice President at Sterling Financial. It's an absolute honor. Damian Knight did not slow down. He didn't even seem to register Mark's existence. His dark eyes remained fixed on a point just behind Mark's shoulder. He walked past Mark's outstretched hand as if it were a piece of furniture, his focus so absolute that the snub felt less like an insult and more like a statement of fact. You are irrelevant. Mark's hand dropped to his side, his face burning with a fresh wave of humiliation, this time laced with disbelief. Tiffany looked utterly mortified. Amelia, meanwhile, was oblivious to the commotion. Her head was bowed, her mind a whirlwind of shame from Mark's attack. She was fighting a desperate battle to keep her composure, to not break down and flee the room. She just wanted to be invisible. She heard the silence, felt the shift in the room's energy, but she assumed it was the lingering awkwardness from her public dressing down. Then, a pair of gleaming, hand-stitched leather shoes entered her field of vision, stopping directly in front of her. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her head. Her gaze traveled up a pair of perfectly tailored trousers, past the jacket of a suit that probably cost more than her car, to a face she knew better than her own. A face she hadn't seen in person for 12 years. Damian. She breathed the name, a ghost on her lips. A flicker of warmth so subtle it was almost imperceptible to anyone else softened the hard lines of Damian Knight's face. He gave her a small, private smile that crinkled the corners of his intense eyes. "Hello, Leah," he said, his voice a low, rich baritone that seemed to vibrate in the silent room. He used the childhood nickname no one else had ever called her. Without breaking eye contact, he reached out his hand, gently taking hers. He lifted it to his lips and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was impossibly tender, yet performed with an air of absolute ownership that sent a collective gasp through the room. He then straightened up, his hand still holding hers, and turned his head slightly. His gaze, now arctic cold, swept over Mark and Tiffany. He didn't need to raise his voice. His quiet words cut through the air like shards of ice. "I trust you were just leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Mark stared, his brain short-circuiting. Amelia and Damian Knight. The world's most reclusive billionaire was kissing her hand, calling her Leah. It was impossible. It defied all logic. This was Amelia, his plain, simple background ex-wife. She couldn't possibly know this man. We... Mark stammered, his mind reeling. Damian's eyes narrowed, a flash of dangerous impatience in their depths. Was there something you didn't understand? Behind them, Tiffany's father, Richard Sterling, was making his way through the crowd, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. He had seen the snub to his son-in-law and the shocking display of affection for the unknown woman. He knew a public relations disaster when he saw one, But before he could intervene, Damian spoke again, his voice now directed at Amelia, yet loud enough for everyone nearby to hear clearly. "I apologize for being late, my love," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I was held up in a meeting with the board. I hope you haven't been waiting long." My love. The two words detonated in the ballroom. If a bomb had gone off, it would have been less shocking. Jaws dropped. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed world, his new life, his triumphant moment, it all tilted on its axis. He looked at Amelia, really looked at her for the first time in years. She was standing beside the most powerful man in the room, her hand in his, looking not like a sparrow, but like a queen who had momentarily forgotten her crown. And in that moment, as he saw the protective fire in Damian Knight's eyes, and the dawning strength in Amelia's, Mark Thorne was gripped by a terrifying, sickening premonition. He hadn't just made a fool of himself. He had made a catastrophic mistake. Amelia felt as though she were in a dream. The solid warmth of Damian's hand wrapped around hers was the only thing anchoring her to reality. The curious, stunned faces of the crowd seemed to blur at the edges of her vision. Her mind was racing, trying to connect the boy she knew from her past with the impossibly powerful man standing before her now. Damian Knight, the shy, brilliant scholarship kid who had lived next door to her family in a modest suburban neighborhood, the boy who had spent hours in her father's workshop learning about engineering and design, her first friend, her first crush, the one who had moved away to California after his father died, disappearing from her life so completely she thought she might have imagined him. And now he was here looking at her with the same protective intensity she remembered from a dozen childhood scrapes. "Damian, what are you doing here?" She managed to ask, her voice still shaky. He squeezed her hand gently. "I believe I'm attending a gala, but more importantly," he lowered his voice for her ears, "only, I was told a friend of mine was in a room full of sharks, and I decided to come do something about it." His gaze lifted from her, hardening as it once again fell upon Mark. The air crackled with tension. Mark, caught between his instinct to flee and his desperation to salvage the situation, finally found his voice. "Mr. Knight, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a weak, placating smile. "Amelia and we have a history. I was just catching up with her." Damian's expression remained unmoved. "What you were just doing," he said, his tone lethally calm, "was publicly harassing the most brilliant and talented person in this room. I find I have very little tolerance for that kind of behavior, especially from men who are desperately trying to get my company's business." The second bomb of the evening had been dropped. The connection was made explicit. Mark's face went from pale to ghostly white. He had been harassing the woman connected to the very man whose approval he needed to secure his future. Richard Sterling finally reached them, inserting himself between Mark and Damian. "Mr. Knight," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative, trying to pour oil on troubled waters. "Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial. I am so sorry for any disturbance. My son-in-law can be overzealous. I can assure you no disrespect was intended toward your guest." He fumbled over the last word, unsure of Amelia's exact relation to the billionaire. Damian turned the full force of his intimidating presence on Richard. "Your son-in-law is a liability, Sterling, and his judgment is appalling." He then looked back at Amelia, his expression softening once more. He gestured to the stage at the far end of the room, where a podium was set up for the evening's speeches. "In fact, I believe I can clear up any confusion about why Amelia is here." With his hand still firmly holding Amelia's, he began to lead her through the parted crowd. People scrambled to get out of their way, their whispers following them like the rustle of leaves. He walked her not to a table but directly toward the stage. He ascended the small set of stairs, pulling her gently up with him, and stood before the microphone. The room was utterly silent. Damian tapped the microphone once. The sound boomed through the ballroom. "Good evening," he began, his voice commanding absolute attention. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Damian Knight. I'm not much for speeches or for parties, but I'm here tonight for 2 reasons. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd before landing back on Mark, pinning him in place. "The first is to announce that my foundation, the Knight Foundation, will be matching every dollar raised here tonight and then doubling the final amount." An audible gasp, followed by a wave of stunned, appreciative applause, swept through the room. This single pledge would mean millions for the Children's Hospital. "The second reason," Damian continued, raising a hand to quiet the applause, "is to introduce you to the visionary who is making my most ambitious project a reality." He turned and looked at Amelia, his expression a mixture of pride and profound respect. "Many of you know about the Elysian Project. My company is building a new kind of community, one that is fully sustainable, technologically integrated, and in perfect harmony with the natural world. It is the most challenging and important work of my life. For months we searched for a lead architect, a designer with not just the skill but the soul to bring this vision to life. We looked at the biggest names, the most famous firms in the world." He paused again, letting the anticipation build. "And we found our visionary right here in New York. A woman whose designs are not just beautiful, but are imbued with a deep understanding of how nature and humanity can coexist. A woman whose talent has been overlooked for far too long." He gently drew a stunned and trembling Amelia forward into the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce you to the lead landscape architect and chief environmental designer for the Elysian Project, Ms. Amelia Vance." The name echoed through the silent ballroom. Amelia Vance. Not Mrs. Mark Thorne, not the help, not the woman on her knees cleaning up a mess, but the creative genius behind the most talked-about development project in the world. For a moment there was only stunned silence. Then one person, then another began to clap. The applause grew, swelling into a thunderous ovation. It was a sound of shock, of respect, and of a dawning collective understanding of the spectacular social misstep they had all just witnessed. Amelia stood frozen in the warm spotlight, the roar of the applause washing over her. She looked out at the sea of faces, faces that had pitied and scorned her just minutes before, now looking at her with awe. Her gaze found Mark. He was standing stock still, his face a grotesque mask of horror and disbelief. His new wife, Tiffany, was staring at her father, who looked as if he was about to have a stroke. In that moment, under the brilliant lights, with the sound of 1,000 people applauding her, and with Damian's steady hand at her back, Amelia finally understood. Mark hadn't just mocked his ex-wife. He had publicly insulted the single most important person in Damian Knight's new multi-billion-dollar empire. And he had done it in front of the entire world. The applause eventually subsided, but the shock waves from Damian's announcement continued to ripple through the ballroom. The atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. The night was no longer about charity or social maneuvering. It was about the spectacular fall of Mark Thorne and the astonishing rise of Amelia Vance. Damian, with a final charming nod to the crowd, led Amelia off the stage. He didn't take her back into the throng of guests. Instead, one of his security guards opened a side door leading to a private corridor, and they slipped away from the prying eyes and frantic whispers. Left behind in the main room, Mark felt as if the floor had dissolved beneath his feet. He was the epicenter of a disaster of his own making. People were staring at him not with pity, but with a kind of delicious, scornful glee. He had built his entire persona on being a man who knew which way the wind was blowing, who could read a room and play the game. Tonight he had not only misread the room, he had tried to humiliate a hurricane. "Mark!" A voice like gravel grated beside him. It was his father-in-law, Richard Sterling. His face, usually ruddy and jovial, was a pale, tight mask of fury. "My office, tomorrow, 7 a.m., and don't be late." He didn't wait for a reply, turning on his heel and stalking off toward his table, leaving Mark and Tiffany standing alone. Tiffany finally broke her stunned silence. A landscape architect, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. She's the visionary behind the Elysian project. You told me she arranged flowers for a living. I didn't know, Mark stammered, his mind still struggling to process the reality of the situation. She was working for some small firm, Viridian Designs. How could I know she was involved with him? You didn't know. Tiffany's voice rose, attracting more stares. Your job is to know things, Mark. Your job is to know who the players are. You just publicly crucified the one person who holds the key to the biggest deal this company has ever chased. My father has been trying to get Damian Knight on the phone for a year. Lower your voice, Tiffany, he pleaded, grabbing her arm. She ripped it away from his grasp. Don't you touch me, she spat, her eyes flashing with a mixture of rage and terror. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've not only destroyed your career, you've probably destroyed mine. Everyone saw this. Everyone saw my husband trying to bully Damian Knight's, whatever she is. We look like fools. No, you look like a fool, and I look like the idiot who married you. The cruelty was breathtaking. Just an hour ago, she had been his adoring partner in Amelia's humiliation. Now, with his status in tatters, he was just collateral damage. He was beginning to understand the brutal transactional nature of the world he had so desperately wanted to join. You were only as valuable as your last success. His eyes scanned the room, searching for an escape, but everywhere he looked, he saw smirking rivals and gossiping associates. He saw the gleam of schadenfreude in their eyes. He had made himself the night's entertainment. Meanwhile, in the quiet, carpeted hallway, Amelia leaned against the wall, her legs feeling weak. Damian, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he said, his voice gentle. He had shed the cold, intimidating persona he wore for the public and was once again the boy she remembered, albeit in a much more expensive suit. I'm just sorry I didn't get here sooner. I had my head of security, Evans, keeping an eye on things. He called me the moment your ex-husband approached you. Amelia blinked. You had me followed. A faint flush colored his cheeks. Not followed, watched over. There's a difference. I knew Thorne would be here. I know what he's like. I didn't want to take any chances. The level of his forethought, his protectiveness was staggering. How did you even find me after all these years? It wasn't easy, he admitted. After I moved, things were difficult. By the time I was in a position to look for you, your family had moved. Your father had passed away. I'm so sorry about that, Leah. He was a great man. It took my people a while, but they eventually found you. I've been keeping track. When I saw your name on the Viridian Designs portfolio and I saw your work, it was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle. He paused, his gaze intense. That speech wasn't just for show, Leah. You truly are a genius. Your vision for sustainable design is decades ahead of anyone else in the field. The Elysian project wouldn't be possible without you. His words, his sincere belief in her, began to patch the holes Mark had just ripped in her self-esteem. All those years she had believed Mark's narrative that she was simple, unambitious, ordinary. But Damian, a man who could have anyone in the world working for him, had sought her out. He saw her value when she couldn't even see it herself. Tears, the ones she had refused to shed in front of Mark, now welled in her eyes. But these were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming relief. Damian reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. He doesn't deserve your tears, he said softly. They're not for him, she whispered. They're for you. Thank you, Damian. Back in the ballroom, Mark finally understood he could not stay. Every moment he remained was another turn of the knife. He grabbed Tiffany's elbow again, more forcefully this time. We're leaving, now. She didn't resist, her fight seemingly drained from her, replaced by a cold, simmering dread. They walked the long walk of shame toward the exit, 100 pairs of eyes following their every step. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were audible condemnations. Can you believe the arrogance? Insulting Knight's chief architect. Sterling Financial is finished. Richard is going to kill him. As they reached the grand doors, Mark glanced back one last time. He saw the side door down the hall crack open. Amelia emerged, followed by Damian Knight. Damian was shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it carefully over Amelia's shoulders, a gesture of profound tenderness and care. They looked for all the world like a king protecting his queen. And as Mark Thorne stepped out into the cold night air, the full weight of his regret finally crashed down upon him. It wasn't just about the lost deal or the ruined career. He had thrown away a diamond because he was too stupid and blind to see that it wasn't a simple stone. And now that diamond was adorning the crown of a man who could crush him without a second thought. Damian's black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the neon-drenched streets of Manhattan with a silence that felt sacred. Inside the world was a hushed cocoon of soft leather and polished burr walnut. The cacophony of the city, the blaring horns, the distant sirens, was reduced to a muted hum. Amelia leaned her head back against the plush headrest, Damian's jacket still wrapped around her shoulders, its faint, clean scent of bergamot and cedar a comforting presence. The adrenaline of the evening was beginning to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a swirling mix of emotions. "Are you okay?" Damian asked, his voice a low rumble beside her. He wasn't looking at her, but was staring out at the city lights giving her space. "I think so," she said quietly. "It all feels surreal, like a movie." She managed a small, wry smile. The part where the mousy librarian takes off her glasses and suddenly she's a princess. He turned to her, then his expression serious. "Don't ever call yourself that, Leah. You were never mousy. You were quiet because you were thinking. You were observing. You were never a princess waiting to be rescued. You're a queen who built her own castle. You just needed someone to show you the key." His words settled deep inside her, a warm and healing balm on old wounds. This was the Damian she remembered, the intensely perceptive boy who saw things others missed. He had always been able to see past her quiet exterior to the busy, imaginative world within. "How did you become you?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at the opulent car, the silent driver, the aura of immense power that surrounded him. "The last I heard, you were going to Stanford on a scholarship." A shadow passed over his features. "It's a long story. After my father died, my mother and I had nothing. The scholarship was my only way out. At Stanford, I got into coding. I started a small software company out of my dorm room with a few friends. It did, well, that was the biggest understatement she had ever heard. His company, Nightfall Technologies, had revolutionized data security and was now one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. I poured everything into my work." He continued, his voice softer now, tinged with a melancholy she hadn't heard before. "For years it was all I did. Work, build the company, make sure my mother was taken care of, make sure we would never be powerless again. It's easy to lose yourself in that." He looked at her. "I did for a while. I forgot about the things your father taught me, about building things with your hands, about creating something beautiful that could last." This was the bridge between their past and present. Her father, a passionate amateur carpenter and gardener, had been a mentor to the fatherless boy next door. He had taught Damian how to read blueprints, how to use tools, how to see the potential in a raw piece of wood or an empty patch of earth. A few years ago, Damian said, "I realized I had built a digital empire, but I hadn't created anything I could actually touch. It was all just code and stock points. I started the Elysian Project as a way to get back to that, to build something real." He smiled faintly. "I just needed an architect who understood the language of the earth. I never thought I'd find the girl whose father taught me that language in the first place." Their reconnection had been as quiet and unexpected as his arrival tonight. After his team had located her, he hadn't reached out directly. Instead, he had anonymously submitted a design challenge to a handful of up-and-coming landscape architecture firms, Viridian Designs among them. The brief was complex. almost impossible design, a self-sustaining green space for a high-density urban environment that produced zero waste and was energy positive. Mr. Abernathy had thought it was a fascinating but purely theoretical exercise. Amelia had thrown herself into it. For 2 weeks, she had worked tirelessly, drawing on every bit of knowledge and passion she had. Her design was audacious and beautiful, incorporating vertical farming, solar glass canopies, and a revolutionary water reclamation system based on the principles of a natural wetland. A week after she submitted it, a black town car had arrived at her small firm. A man in a severe suit had handed Mr. Abernathy a single envelope containing a non-disclosure agreement and a contract offering Amelia the lead position on a project so massive her boss had to sit down. Their first meeting in 12 years had been in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom. He was the intimidating Damian Knight, CEO and tech titan. She was the nervous, unknown designer. But the moment their eyes met, the years had melted away. He was just Damian. She was just Leah. "You never told me why you really left Mark," Damian said gently, pulling her from her reverie. The official story was irreconcilable differences. Amelia sighed, tracing a pattern on the condensation of her window. "The real story is that I wasn't enough for him. I wasn't glamorous enough or connected enough. He wanted to trade up. And he did." She looked at Damian, her expression vulnerable. "The worst part is, for a long time I believed him. I thought I was the reason it failed, that I was destined to be background." "He was a fool," Damian stated, his voice flat and final. "He was a man panning for gold who threw away the Hope diamond because it was covered in a little bit of mud. His loss, Leah. Don't ever let his small-mindedness define your worth." The car pulled to a stop in front of her modest Brooklyn brownstone. The contrast between the Rolls-Royce and the humble walk-up apartment building was stark. "You don't have to live here anymore, you know," Damian said, gesturing to the building. "I could arrange—" "No!" She cut him off, but her tone was gentle. "Not yet. This place, it's mine. I got it on my own with my own salary. It's the first place that's ever felt like it was just for me. I'm not ready to give that up." He nodded, understanding immediately. He wasn't trying to buy her or save her. He was simply offering, and he respected her choice. It was a level of respect Mark had never shown her. The driver opened her door. Damian walked her to the front steps of the building. Under the warm glow of the stoop light, they stood in a comfortable silence. "Thank you, Damian," she said again. "For everything. Not just for tonight. For seeing me." "Always, Leah," he replied softly. On a sudden impulse, Amelia reached up on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. His skin was warm. For a moment his arm came up as if to encircle her waist, a spark of electricity passing between them. But he stopped himself. He was letting her set the pace, giving her the control she'd never had with Mark. She smiled, a genuine radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "I'll see you at the site on Monday." "I'm looking forward to it, Ms. Vance," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. She turned and walked up the steps, unlocking her door and disappearing inside. Damian stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching the light in her window flick on. He had spent the last decade building an impenetrable fortress around himself. But tonight, watching Mark Thorne try to tear Amelia down, he had felt a crack in that fortress. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a fierce, primal, protective rage. And he knew with absolute certainty that he would burn the world to the ground before he ever let anyone hurt her again. The sun rose at 6:00 a.m. the next morning. By 7:00 a.m., Mark Thorne was standing in Richard Sterling's cavernous, mahogany-paneled office on the 50th floor of the Sterling Financial Building. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night on the couch in the guest room of his and Tiffany's sprawling penthouse after she had informed him she couldn't bear to look at his pathetic failure of a face. Richard Sterling was seated behind a desk the size of a small boat, his back to the panoramic view of the city. He wasn't shouting. That would have been a relief. Instead, he was eerily calm, which was far more terrifying. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the single uncomfortable-looking chair opposite his desk. Mark sat. The silence stretched for a full minute. Richard steepled his fingers, staring at Mark over the top of them. "Do you know," Richard began, his voice dangerously soft, "what the primary function of an investment firm is, Mark? To grow our clients' wealth." Mark recited, his own voice sounding thin and reedy. "Wrong." Richard snapped, the calm facade cracking for a moment. "It's to manage risk. It's to identify potential threats and neutralize them. It's to understand the landscape, know the players, and never ever bet on a losing horse." He leaned forward, his eyes like chips of granite. "Last night you didn't just bet on a losing horse. You shot our prize stallion in the head in the middle of the Kentucky Derby." Mark swallowed hard. "Richard, I can fix this. I can call Amelia. I can apologize." "Apologize." Richard let out a short, bark-like laugh devoid of humor. "You think a Hallmark card is going to fix this?" At 5:30 this morning, I received an email from Damian Knight's legal team. They are officially terminating all preliminary discussions with Sterling Financial regarding the Elysian project. They have also instructed their primary investment fund, one of our largest institutional clients, to pull their portfolio from our management. That's a 9-figure loss, Mark. 9 figures. Mark felt the air leave his lungs. This was worse than he could have possibly imagined. "But that's not all," Richard continued, the chilling calm returning. "The story of your little performance at the gala is already the lead item on every financial gossip blog and society page. Sterling VP's public blunder costs firm billion-dollar deal. We're a laughingstock." He picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk. "This is your severance agreement. It's not generous. Our lawyers inform me that your actions last night constitute a gross negligence clause in your contract, so we don't technically have to give you anything. But I am. Consider it a fee for you to disappear from my life, and more importantly, my daughter's life, as quickly and quietly as possible." Mark stared at the paper. "My daughter," he echoed numbly. "Tiffany. She's not." "Tiffany is a Sterling," Richard said coldly. "And Sterlings do not remain married to liabilities. She'll be filing for divorce by the end of the day. The prenup you signed is ironclad. You'll leave with exactly what you came with, which, as I recall, was nothing but a cheap suit and an oversized ego. The entire world, Mark had built, the job, the money, the wife, the status, had been liquidated in less than 12 hours. He was left with nothing. "Get out of my office," Richard said, turning his chair to face the window, a clear dismissal. "And get out of my building. Your security pass has been deactivated. A guard will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 10 minutes. Numbly, Mark stood. He took the paper and walked out of the office. A stern-faced security guard was waiting for him. The walk to his corner office was the most humiliating experience of his life. His former colleagues averted their eyes. Whispers followed him down the hall. In his office, he stared at the pictures on his desk, him and Tiffany in Aspen, him and Richard on a golf course. It was all a lie, a fragile house of cards he had mistaken for a fortress. He packed his few personal items into a cardboard box and was escorted out through a service elevator, a final petty indignity. Standing on the street in the harsh morning light, holding a box of his failed life, Mark finally allowed himself to feel the full, crushing weight of his regret. But it was a sour, selfish thing. He wasn't sorry for hurting Amelia. He was sorry he had been caught. He was sorry he had picked the wrong side. He had humiliated her to feel powerful, and in doing so had handed all the power to her. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling, and scrolled to her number. He had to try. He had to beg. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. "Amelia, it's Mark." He began, his voice cracking with desperation. "Listen, I am so sorry about last night. I was a complete jerk, an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking. I've made a terrible mistake, Leah. Amy, I've lost everything. Please just call me back. We can talk. Please. He hung up feeling sick. He had even used Damian's nickname for her, a desperate, pathetic attempt to find some long-lost connection. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Amelia's number. His heart leaped with a sliver of hope. He opened it. The message was brief and brutally clear. Do not contact this number again. Any further attempts at communication will be forwarded to Mr. Knight's legal counsel. It was over. Every door was closed. He had flown so close to the sun, and now he was back on the ground. His wax wings melted his ambition, a pile of ashes at his feet. And as he looked up at the towering skyscrapers of the city that had once seemed to promise him everything, he realized the truth. He hadn't been destined for more. He had just been a temporary guest in a world he never truly belonged to, and he had just been violently evicted. 6 months later, spring had arrived in New York. Amelia stood on the rooftop of the Elysian building, a 1-acre park of her own design thriving 40 stories above the city. She moved with a newfound confidence, directing a team of botanists with the quiet authority of someone who had built her own world. Footsteps on the path announced Damian's arrival. He approached with 2 cups of coffee, his usual sharp suit replaced by simple jeans and a Henley. He had shed the intimidating billionaire persona, leaving only the man who looked at her with profound respect and affection. "Fuel for the chief architect," he said, handing her a cup. He gestured with his own cup towards a nearby newsstand visible from the edge of the roof. "I saw you made the cover of Metropolis magazine. The Architect of Tomorrow. Has a nice ring to it." Amelia smiled a genuine, radiant expression. "We make a good team," she replied, leaning against him as they looked out over their creation. Down on the street below, a man in a rumpled, ill-fitting suit stopped at that same newsstand. It was Mark Thorne. His face was etched with the bitterness of a spectacular fall from grace. After being fired and divorced in the same week, he was now a struggling real estate agent in the outer boroughs. His eyes landed on the magazine cover. There was Amelia, vibrant and powerful, smiling beside Damian Knight. The headline read, "Building the Future Power Couple, Damian Knight and Amelia Vance on Life, Love, and the Elysian Project." A wave of cold, final regret washed over him. He had looked at a diamond, and believing it to be a common stone had thrown it away. Now it was the centerpiece of another man's world. He turned and walked away, a ghost swallowed by the city he had failed to conquer. High above, Amelia felt a profound sense of peace. Mark was a forgotten chapter. Her life was no longer defined by his judgment but by the beautiful world she was building. Damian turned her to face him, his dark eyes soft. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," she said. "And how glad I am to be right here." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss full of promise, high above the city in the heart of the garden she had brought to life. And so Amelia's story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclamation. She didn't just get back at her ex-husband, she reclaimed her talent, her confidence, and her narrative. Mark's biggest mistake wasn't insulting her in front of a crowd. It was failing to see the queen standing right in front of him all along. True value is never determined by the opinions of those who refuse to see it. It's proven by the incredible things you build when you finally have the freedom to grow. In the end, living a life filled with purpose, success, and genuine love was a far more powerful statement than any angry words could ever be. What did you think of Amelia's incredible transformation? Have you ever seen someone so spectacularly underestimate another person? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves a good story of triumph, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic tales. Thanks for listening.